You know, last time I was talking about the whole Artemis project, NASA moon plans, I was kind of taking a fat dookie on it, because I was talking about how much I'm not really into the whole gateway thing, and I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but apparently the NASA administrator watches my channel, because since then the whole gateway thing's basically been ditched. They've rejigged the entire Artemis program to make things significantly more productive, and then this week they've gone ahead and basically told us they're building a city on the moon. Are you kidding me? Holy moly! Sounds good to me, dog. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the word city has been thrown around in the press conference that described the scale of the moon base that's going to be being built by the US and partners. Now, that might be a little bit of an over-optimistic way of putting it. Fair enough, the plan is to make a base that's hundreds of square kilometers, but I imagine this is going to be more like assets thinly spread around the landscape within an area that big, rather than it being like a dense urban environment.
So you'll have the habitats on the tops of the hills where they get sunlight. You know, power systems, nuclear systems need to be a kilometer or more away for the radiation protection. So all of these things, when you start putting them together, end up sprawling a little bit more like a city as you start building it out. And so to then have power in remote areas where you might be doing your in situ resource utilization, the aggregate mining, looking for water ice, or science operations in a different location. So it is to accomplish all that is before us requires a significant amount of distribution of assets, capabilities, and systems to do the things we're looking to do on the moon, to do the exploration and return that benefit to humanity.
Regardless what is actually about to happen with regards to the Artemis program and the moon base timeline, the whole thing really is going to be incredible. You can tell that the US is finally feeling the pressure of China breathing down their ass crack, because they are now quite quickly deciding to get the f*** on with things that the general public has wanted to happen for like half a century now. Actually, I say that. Most people seem to be brain-rotted dingleberries who think that spending any money on space is somehow just a waste of money, an opinion that makes me want to shit in my hands and clap every time I hear it. I guess because in popular culture, space is just associated with billionaire pet projects now, which fair enough to a degree, but also if I stopped supporting all the good things that people I don't like also happen to support, then I'm pretty sure I'd die of oxygen deprivation pretty quickly. Anyway, my point is I'm super stoked we're going back to the moon, and I'm even more stoked that we're doing it increasingly quickly and increasingly efficiently. Anyway, here's my incompetent buffoon summary of the plan as it currently stands. The plan for the moon base is currently split into 3 phases. The final phase is sustained human presence on the moon with a base. That starts in 2032, and it's going to continue, hopefully continuously thereafter. You know, just stick it out till the heat death of the universe. In order to get to that phase, we need to go through phase 2, which is establishing early infrastructure. This is going to happen between 2029 and 2032, and to get to that point, we need to build and test and learn how things are going to have to work, and we're going to have the first crewed missions. So phase 1 is going to end in 2029 when we transition into the establishing early infrastructure phase. But actually, technically, even as they announced this, phase 1 has already started. Artemis 2, that was part of phase 1. I hope you like initial phases, Miss Turner. Because you're in one! Anyway, let's go ahead and go see NASA's plans right open. So I'll begin by talking about how Artemis fits into this, because the Artemis program has been rejigged, right? So we already had Artemis 1 and Artemis 2. Artemis 2 was the crewed lunar flyby. NASA successfully flew astronauts around the moon back in April 2026, and that mission validated Orion as a spacecraft that actually works with people inside of it. You know, the life support systems work and all that jazz. The toilet might need some work though. Ich bin gefüllt mit Pisswasser! Artemis 3 was initially going to be a lunar landing, but since things have been changed, Artemis 3 is now going to be a systems test mission. Now, this sounds like a step back, but it's actually a very sensible thing to do, and it's going to make things faster in the long run. Artemis 3 now is just going to happen in low Earth orbit. It's going to be a demonstration that their equipment can do the things that it's going to need to do when we're doing it for real. Primarily, I think the main issue is basically conducting docking demonstrations between Orion and commercial lunar landers. You know, like the SpaceX and Blue Origin spacecraft that are going to be involved. They want to make sure that they can actually dock together properly, and then also validate various procedures that need to happen for an actual lunar landing operation to go ahead. Conceptually, this is pretty similar to how they actually did things on Apollo anyway. Testing things in low Earth orbit before you need them on the moon 250,000 miles away is usually probably a good idea. And with that out of the way, the cadence of missions going forward after that is going to be faster than it was planned to be in the earlier version of what the Artemis program was going to be. So Artemis 2 happened this year, 2026. Artemis 3 is going to happen 2027, next year. Artemis 4 is going to happen the year after that, 2028. And Artemis 4 is now expected to be the first lunar landing mission. So the goals of this is going to be the first first lunar landing in more than half a century. It's going to test initial sustained surface operations. It's going to test long-duration habitation technologies where possible, and presumably it's going to deploy some early moon base infrastructure as well if it can. Artemis 5 is already happening at the point where really we're in phase 2. So we're basically like halfway through phase 1 already. Well, not really. In terms of the Artemis missions, we're halfway through phase 1. So the Artemis 5 missions and beyond will be about delivering cargo modules, expanding the habitat on the surface, deploying power systems, delivering rovers to the surface, pressurized rovers that people will actually use, slowly increasing the duration of crew staying on the surface, and trying to begin permanent logistics cycles so that people can just be there continuously, right? There will always be crew present there. So how does this dovetail with the newly announced moon base plans? Okay, so the moon base almost certainly going to be built near the lunar South Pole. Shackleton Crater is brought up a lot, basically because it's in a state of perpetual twilight, so you can basically put a solar panel on a big stick and catch the sun continuously. It's either that or bringing nuclear sources with us. Also, water ice is potentially fairly abundant there, because down in the depths of the craters, there's actually places which are shadowed continuously. So instead of, basically boiling away, if there is any water there, it will actually have just been frozen as this kind of permafrost that's still there and we can go and access and get drinking water from. Basically, this part of the moon is going to be very strategically useful, and I have to imagine the US and partners want to get there before China does, because I imagine there's kind of a finders keepers type of situation going on. Depends exactly how everyone ends up following through on the Artemis Accords. I like to imagine the US and China are going to be set up on opposite sides of Shackleton Crater and they're just going to stand there shaking their fists at each other. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, statistically speaking, you're probably not subscribed, so I'll make you a deal. Press the subscribe button and I won't come over to your house and do this. Alright, thanks, back to the video. Anyway, in terms of work that's going to happen on the ground during phase 1, so whilst the early Artemis missions are ongoing, we're going to have a bunch of missions, 25 robotic missions, 21 lunar landings, a bunch of different companies, like, commercial entities involved instead of this all being a government-run thing like it was back in the Apollo days. There's going to be landers, cargo deliveries, terrain mapping, lunar communication systems, resource prospecting, surface power testing. One really interesting idea is the planned use of hopping drones to map out and scan the terrain around the South Pole. It's basically a tiny lander that's just going to hop around all over the surface. Cool idea. NASA's awarded various contracts for lunar terrain vehicles, basically next generation moon rovers. Companies involved include Blue Origin, Firefly Aerospace, Lunar Outpost, Astrolab, and there's definitely going to be more announcements in the future. Once phase 2 rolls around, then we're going to start seeing habitats being put on the surface. Communications towers, solar farms, nuclear surface reactors. Since phase 3 is going to hopefully have permanent, continuous habitation, a large goal of phase 2 is going to be semi-permanent habitation. They're going to want astronauts not just to land there and then leave, they're going to want astronauts to stay there for a considerable amount of time to make sure systems work that allow them to do that. They're going to try and make sure that infrastructure survives between missions, that equipment can be reusable rather than being disposable. A big issue on the moon is that the material on the surface of the moon is very sharp, so those old Apollo spacesuits got torn to shreds when they were jumping about on the surface. Like, those things really had a finite lifespan. You wouldn't want to keep wearing a suit like that week after week after week after week on the lunar surface, because sooner or later you're going to get a tear in the suit and that's going to end very badly. So we're going to want to iron out things like that and make sure stuff really lasts for a long time. And then phase 3 onwards, sustained human presence, right? The real moon base era. And it's crazy because 2032 is really not that far away. That's not a long time. We're already halfway through 2026. We're more than halfway through this decade. That on its own is fucking terrifying. 2032 is as far from where we are now as we are now from when COVID happened. It's not that long. We're going to have a moon base by then. That's fucking crazy. Or at least that's the plan. You never know. Keep your pants on. Anyway, the coolest bit of this phase, I think, is going to be the different ways that we'll try out in situ resource utilization. Like, obviously, you need to build a spacecraft to get you to the moon and the initial modules and stuff for habitats. But sooner or later, really, you want to have enough stuff on the moon so that you don't have to bring much more stuff. Like, you can just make what you need out of lunar material. You could make a much bigger base, for example, if you could manipulate the terrain of the moon itself into a base, whether that's feeding the material through a 3D printer or making bricks out of it and building a structure, or digging into the surface and essentially making caves that connect to each other, or whatever it is. You'll be able to make a much bigger structure if you actually use what's there rather than having to bring stuff from Earth every time you want to make anything. And also, if we can start having spacecraft themselves be based on the moon, then it's going to be ridiculously easy, comparatively, to launch things from the moon to Mars and elsewhere in the solar system than it would be to launch things off of Earth and go straight to Mars or anywhere else. The amount of Delta V gravity involved is gigantically less from the moon. Put simply, on the moon, you don't have to be going as fast to be in orbit because the gravity is less. And also, you barely even have to go upwards before you start going sideways because the moon has almost no atmosphere, so there's no drag. So you can basically just fire something sideways fast enough and it's in orbit already. Which means if you were really being serious about this, you'd put a spacecraft inside a mass driver and you'd launch it with that, and then you have a fully loaded spacecraft, like filled with propellant, already in lunar orbit, and from there it's easy to get to wherever you want to go, comparatively. So yeah, there's a big upfront cost in setting up this whole moon base or whatever, but any companies or countries that manage to do that or be involved in it in any way, in the long run are going to benefit massively because they're going to be the ones with easy access to the entire solar system, the resources of which are effectively infinite. You know what else is effectively infinite? No, it's not my wiener, it's the love I have for my elite level supporters. Thunderbolt 22A10, who keeps a jar of camel hump juice in their underpants drawer. Nomad Greg, who's incredibly dense. Andrew Maul, who's concentrating on their toes right now. John Bejarano, who has a remarkable collection of inappropriately embroidered napkins. JDK, who may be struggling but is very handsome. Mutantious Doom, who keeps waking up damp for some reason. Stormester Ritter, who's currently suspended over a bathtub filled with lasagna. Nikita Lurie, who communicates by making gurgling noises down a used toilet roll tube. Aaron Rowe, who enjoys mollusks, crustaceans, and all things oceanic and crusty. Bonk Chunk, who's yet to reply to my advances, but I'ma keep at it. That one boy, who stole a raccoon from the zoo and released it into your mum's garage. Trenton Caldwell, who was never proven to be the shooter. Jimbo Quiz, whose butt crack is horizontal. Draco91, who has an early review copy of Sex 2. And thanks to all my other supporters too. Don't forget to join the Patreon or the channel membership if you want to be featured in my video credits or chat on the Discord. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.